Picture the stark expanse of the Montana plains under a relentless sun. A widow Rachel and her young child Leah have been abandoned without mercy by the very family who should have protected them. The wagon they relied on is sabotaged, leaving them to face almost certain doom. No food, little water and vultures circling overhead. Just when all hope seems lost, a lone rider appears on the horizon. A mysterious figure known as the Ghost of Calder Valley. Is he a savior or another threat in a land that's never heard of compassion? If that image gets your heart pounding, stick around for the entire story. You'll discover how one reclusive cowboy summons the courage to rescue a mother and child from betrayal, forging a bond that might heal his own haunted past. You won't want to miss the unexpected twists or the inspiring finale. And if you love tales of grit, heart, and triumph in the wild frontier, make sure you subscribe to this channel. More incredible stories await you every day, so don't miss out. A relentless Montana sun scorched the rolling plains one early June morning as Rachel Adler stood at the window of her modest bedroom, twisting the gold wedding band on her finger. Just beyond the thin glass, her 6-year-old daughter Leah played in the yard where russet-hued chickens clucked softly around her small feet. The ring Rachel wore had once symbolized her bond with Daniel Adler, the man she'd traveled west to build a ranching life with. But Daniel was gone now, buried in a grave overlooking the creek he loved. That grave had shattered Rachel's world. Now overshadowing her grief were the demands of Daniel's father, Malcolm Adler, a power in the territory who'd financed much of the ranch. Of late, his once polite entreaties for Rachel to visit her family back east had grown pointed, and his gaze had developed a calculating, almost predatory edge. She had overheard hushed conversations between Malcolm and Daniel's younger brother Neil about forged papers and suspect debts. It all seemed to revolve around control of the property that Daniel and Rachel had tried so hard to pay off. Rachel's hand shook as she lifted it from the windowsill. "He can't force me to leave," she told herself. "Not if I can unravel what he's done." The entire ranch was in her name and Daniel's, that much she knew from the original deed they'd both signed. But the talk about a missing new deed and unsettled mortgages had left her uneasy. If Malcolm really had the law in his pocket, she might not have a formal recourse. Leah's voice drifted through the open window. "Mama, will Papa be back for dinner?" The child's question cut deeper than any threat, for Daniel's absence still weighed on them both. Rachel forced a steady breath, went outside and knelt next to her daughter. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "Papa's gone to heaven. He won't be coming home anymore. But I promise I'll keep you safe." Before Leah could reply, dust plumed along the ranch road. Malcolm and Neil rode up, both dismounting, with the certainty of men who assumed their authority would not be challenged. Malcolm removed his hat and glanced at Rachel without an ounce of warmth. He looked over the ranch yard with a proprietary air, as though counting what might soon be his. Neil lingered behind, arms folded, gaze flickering with barely contained guilt. "We need to talk, Rachel." Malcolm set his timbre, that of a man used to giving orders, in private. He glanced at Leah, who clutched at her mother's skirt. Rachel's stomach twisted, but she forced a nod. "Come inside." The tension was palpable as they moved into the front room of the homestead. A simple wooden house with 2 bedrooms, a tiny parlor, and a kitchen that smelled of bread Leah and Rachel had baked that morning. It was the home Rachel and Daniel had built from scratch, filling it with their personal touches and earnest dreams. It hurt to see Malcolm seat himself in Daniel's armchair, placing his boots on the braided rug Daniel's mother had once braided years ago. "We've given you time to grieve," Malcolm began, not bothering to hide his impatience. "But the mortgage is overdue and you can't run a ranch by yourself. The bank's impatient and you owe far more than you likely realize. This place will slip through your fingers if you don't accept our help." Rachel's heart lurched. "Daniel said we'd nearly paid off everything. He wouldn't have lied to me." Malcolm's jaw tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his eyes. "Daniel was an idealist. Paperwork doesn't lie. If you stay, you'll lose everything." "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. "That you and Leah travel east?" Neil interjected with forced sympathy. "We've bought you tickets on Thursday's stagecoach. Once you're settled, we'll arrange the property details. Maybe you can come back once it's stabilized." She didn't miss the underlying threat, nor the way Malcolm's eyes narrowed when she hesitated. Leah, oblivious, peeked through the doorway, hugging a homemade rag doll, the last gift Daniel had given her. "There's no reason for you to remain in such a difficult place," Malcolm pressed. "Think of Leah's safety." Within minutes, father and son left, satisfied they'd laid down the law. Rachel stood paralyzed, tears she refused to shed burning in her eyes. "They're pushing me out," she realized. They want to bury Daniel's truce with him. Outside, the wind stirred dust across the yard where her daughter watched the departing riders rag doll in hand, looking more vulnerable than ever. That night, Rachel lit a single lamp at the kitchen table while Leah slept upstairs. She opened the strongbox Daniel had insisted they keep for important papers. By the flame's glow, she rifled through folded deeds, receipts, and letters. Her heart drummed when she discovered a letter Daniel had penned in shaky handwriting just before his accident at the lumber mill. His words hinted at conspiracies involving missing funds and manipulated documents. He mentioned gaps in the ranch's records and father's forgeries. Most disturbing was the line, "If anything happens to me, trust no one in this family except maybe Neil. He's not wholly lost." Rachel pressed the letter to her chest, the weight of betrayal crushing her. She recalled Daniel's love for the wide-open Montana plains, how he had insisted Leah learn every fence post and water trough, so the land would feel like home. Now that same land was being stolen under false pretenses, orchestrated by the man who should have protected them. A quiet rage replaced her fear. They killed him for this ranch, and they'd do worse to me and Leah if we threatened their plans. Sunrise found her exhausted but determined. She packed a small trunk with clothes, a few personal keepsakes, and as much dried food as possible. Her plan was to board the stagecoach under Malcolm's watchful eye, then slip away at the first station. She knew of a town further west where an old friend of Daniel's might help them prove the forgery. "We can vanish before Malcolm can track us," she told herself. "I'll keep Leah safe." Malcolm and Neil arrived just after dawn, accompanied by their lawyer, a weasel-eyed man named Edgar Murray, who brandished questionable documents. Edgar droned about mortgages and unsettled debts. But Rachel's gaze was locked on Neil. He stood aside, chewing his lip, looking haunted. She remembered Daniel's note. He's not wholly lost. Could she trust him? Hard to say, but she caught pity in Neil's eyes. If he truly wanted to help, he might do so quietly later on. By noon, mother and daughter were aboard the stagecoach, forced to endure a tense farewell scene, as Malcolm made a show of wishing them a safe journey and swift return when matters are resolved. Leah, half asleep, clung to Rachel, the ragdoll pressed between them. The coach lurched forward, wheels rattling over uneven terrain. Just as Rachel hoped, the driver took a less traveled route, presumably to keep them from outsiders. But Rachel's instincts prickled. The driver never once looked her in the eye. Another passenger sat in the corner, hat brim pulled low over his face. Something about him reeked of complicity. Hours passed, sweat pooling on Rachel's neck in the sweltering interior. Leah dozed, lulled by the constant jostle. Then came a sickening crack like bones snapping. But it was the wagon wheel. The driver cursed, bringing the stagecoach to a lurching halt in a remote stretch of sun-baked prairie. "We're done for," the driver growled. "Need to get fresh wheels from the station. It's, 20 miles back." A half smile played on his lips, lethal in its meaning. "You ladies wait here." Rachel scrambled from the wreck, spotting the damaged wheel intentionally sabotaged. That passenger in this corner had vanished as if he'd jumped just before the crash. Leah rubbed her eyes, stepping onto the dust-laden ground, coughing from the swirling grit. "Mama." "It's okay, baby," Rachel lied, scanning the horizon for any sign of help. The driver mounted the only remaining horse, ironically carrying their trunk with him, claiming it was too heavy to leave behind. Then he spurred off. A swirl of dust and he was gone. No trace or promise of return. A scorching sun hammered down on mother and child, overshadowed only by the thin silhouette of vultures gathering overhead. Rachel's mouth went dry, her mind racing. "We have to walk." She rummaged inside the overturned stage for anything left behind, an almost empty canteen of lukewarm water, half a loaf of stale bread. "We can't stay," she murmured to Leah, voice taut with adrenaline. "We'll walk east until we hit a creek or see riders." Leah, tears welling, clutched her ragdoll. She was brave, but the fear shone in her eyes. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand. "We'll be fine, sweetheart," she said, though doubt gnawed at her. "Malcolm meant for us to die out here," her mind screamed. And so they began a desperate trek. Mother and daughter, step by step across the harsh plains, haunted by the knowledge that no one would come looking for them, and if they did, it would be men paid to ensure their silence. They walked for hours. The summer heat suffocated them, each footstep stirring puffs of dust that clung to their clothes. Leah's cheeks turned a worrying shade of pink, and her small body trembled with fatigue. Each time Rachel urged her daughter forward, guilt lanced through her for pushing so hard, but staying put meant certain death. The canteen had only a few pitiful sips left. Rachel rationed them fiercely. By midday, they found a cluster of rocks that offered pitiful shade, barely enough to shield them from the worst of the sun. Rachel's head spun with thirst, her skin prickling ominously. Leah sagged, dropping onto the ground with her rag doll cradled in limp arms. "Mama," she whispered, eyes glazed. "I'm so tired." Rachel draped her shawl over Leah, hoping to shield her from the intensity of the heat. Each breath felt like inhaling hot coals. She searched the horizon for any sign of rescue, but only heat waves shimmered, distorting the landscape into illusions. A swirl of dust might have been wind or a distant rider. It was impossible to tell. She whispered a prayer, though she wasn't sure who might hear in this forsaken wilderness. Then, as if conjured by her desperation, a distant shape emerged from the mirages. At first, she worried it was an apparition, but it grew larger, more distinct. A solitary rider approached, forging through the wavy haze. Could it be the hired gun who'd sabotaged them, returning to finish the job? Rachel steeled herself, clutching the canteen like a makeshift weapon. But as the horse slowed, the man astride, it scanned the horizon, then stopped, about 15 feet away. He wore a battered cavalry hat and carried a long rifle strapped across his saddle. Sun-scorched, lean and silent, he seemed part of the land itself. He took in the scene, Rachel's parched lips, Leah's semi-conscious form, and dismounted. With careful, measured steps, he approached, tossing a water skin at Rachel's feet. "Drink small sips," he said, voice low and hoarse from disuse. Rachel fumbled to uncork the skin, cradling Leah's head as she trickled water into her daughter's mouth. "Thank you," she croaked, letting herself take only one gulp before her body demanded more. She swallowed again, her mind reeling at the relief. "Name's Luke Carver," the man said, adjusting the brim of his hat so she could see worn lines across his brow, testament to a life spent under the sun. "Folks around these parts call me the ghost of Calder Valley." "You are," she told him, her name voice shaking with residual terror. "Rachel Adler, this is my daughter Leah." She hesitated. "Our stagecoach driver left us. Said he'd go for help, but I don't think he's coming back." Luke's jaw tightened, eyes flicking to the horizon. "He won't. Likely worked for someone who wanted you gone." Her stomach clenched. This stranger within minutes confirmed her suspicions. Leah stirred, looking up at him with half-lidded eyes. "Mama," she mumbled, "is he an angel?" Luke's gaze flickered with something like regret. "No angels here, little one," he murmured, "but I won't leave you." In one swift motion, he scooped Leah into his arms, supporting her so gently it almost broke Rachel's heart. "My place is a few miles north," he said, eyeing Rachel's trembling posture. "You come along behind us. We'll get you both water and shade." Rachel wanted to argue that she could walk on her own, but her knees threatened to buckle. I can keep up," she insisted, though. Her throat burned with dehydration. Luke nodded curtly, swinging onto his horse. Leah held securely in front of him. The rifle clanked against the saddle, a reminder of the violence that pervaded these plains. "Follow me," he repeated and set off, feeling vulnerable yet paradoxically safer than before. Rachel set one hand on the horse's flank, matching the animal's steady gait as best she could. Heat rose from the ground like a furnace blast, but Luke's presence warded off any immediate threat. At least she wouldn't collapse unseen in the middle of nowhere. They trekked a winding road around harsh scrubland, eventually dipping into a shallow ravine where Rachel caught a glimpse of cottonwoods alive with the promise of water. She smelled it before she saw it, that sweet tang of life-giving moisture. At the ravine's far end, nestled behind a natural rise, stood a small wooden cabin with a lean-to stable. There was no fence, no sign, just raw land. Leah whimpered softly, her fever evident in her reddened cheeks. Luke dismounted near the cabin, carefully lowering Leah into Rachel's arms. "Inside," he said tersely, unlocking the door and stepping aside so they could enter. Rachel's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim interior. With only a single window and Spartan furnishings, it felt more like a hideout than a home. "You'll be safe here," Luke said, setting his rifle by the door as though it were a constant companion. "Let her rest. I'll get water from the creek." There's a cot in the corner. Rachel laid Leah down, pressing a trembling hand to her daughter's forehead. Too hot. As she looked around, she noticed a single photograph on a small shelf, a woman and a boy captured in happier times. Dust coated the frame, but it was evident Luke had placed it where he could see it often. 1,000 questions swirled in Rachel's mind. Who was Luke Carver? Why did he live in such isolation, and would they really be safe here or just trapped under a new danger? Yet as Leah shifted, moaning in her feverish state, Rachel's immediate concern overrode everything else. She needed to bring her child's temperature down and keep them both alive. Luke returned shortly with a bucket of creek water, setting it beside the cot. His gaze flicked to the photograph she'd been studying. That was my family, he said quietly, voice thick with memories. Long gone now? Rachel dunked a rag in the water, carefully sponging Leah's forehead. I'm sorry, she whispered. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, and I'm grateful you found us. He exhaled slowly, crossing his arms. I've seen what men will do for land or money. If I hadn't found you, the vultures would have. The unvarnished truth hung between them, though she barely knew Luke. Rachel felt an odd sense of kinship. Betrayed by her own in-laws, adrift in a hostile environment, she understood the appeal of isolation. Perhaps he recognized it in her too, that steely determination masked by desperation. Outside, the horse let out a tired whinny, and the cabin walls seemed to hold their breath. We'll figure out who left you out there, Luke said finally, his eyes flicking to Leah's small form. But first, get some rest. You need it as much as your girl. Rachel wanted to protest to remain on guard, but her body betrayed her. She nodded weakly, letting him guide her to a worn blanket near the cot. As she closed her eyes, one thought pushed aside the swirl of fear. For Leah's sake, I must trust him, if only until we have strength to do otherwise. When Rachel awoke, the angle of light through the cabin's single window told her hours had passed. Leah lay curled on the cot, cheeks less flushed than before, her rag doll nestled against her. Luke stood by a makeshift stove, stirring a tin pot that gave off the aroma of boiled herbs. He glanced over when she stirred. Face impassive, fever's down, he said. Gave her some of my old cavalry medicine. Could hear her nightmares, though. Rachel rubbed her eyes, longing for fresh clothes and a sense of normalcy. Thank you, the words felt inadequate. She tried to stand only to realize her legs still wobbled. Do you have any idea who sabotaged the stagecoach? Luke ladled some steaming liquid into a cup. Likely hired by the same folks who want you out of the picture. You mentioned an in-law named Malcolm. She nodded, swallowing a fresh wave of bitterness. He's my father-in-law. He and his lawyer claimed the ranch was in debt. They're forcing me to leave so they can claim it. I suspect they might have arranged Daniel's death. Her voice trembled momentarily. Luke offered the cup. Drink. It'll replenish you. That's a mighty grave accusation. Rachel sipped, finding the taste bitter, but oddly soothing. Daniel left me letters indicating something about forged deeds. It's the only reason I can see for them to do all this. That land has become valuable, I guess. He didn't reply immediately. Outside, a light breeze rustled through the cottonwoods, the only sound in this remote homestead. At last, Luke spoke. I know what it's like to lose family. Also know the law around here can be selective. If your father-in-law has money and connections, it's hard to get justice. Her thoughts flitted to the small locked chest she had rummaged in back home. Daniel's real documents. I have some proof, or did before the stage fiasco. I managed to tuck some letters in my skirt lining. She patted her side, reassuring herself they were still there. But how do we use them if half the territory answers to Malcolm's influence? Luke's jaw tightened. We find a marshal who doesn't scare easy. There's a fort about a 2-day ride from here. If we get you there with that evidence, they can investigate. Rachel felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by the danger. They're not going to just let me waltz out of here. Malcolm might have men searching. You might be in danger too, just for harboring us. He gave a small, wry laugh. I've been in danger for years. I keep away from folks, so I won't see any more harm done. But letting you and Leah die in the desert didn't sit right. A hush lingered as they locked eyes. Leah murmured in her sleep, as though calling them back to the reason they had to keep fighting. Finally, Rachel cleared her throat. Your family, the photograph on your shelf. What happened? His gaze flicked away. They were attacked a long time ago, when I was off on a cavalry mission. My wife had discovered someone forging deeds, forcing smaller ranchers off their land. She was going to talk to the territorial judge. Next thing I come home to, his voice caught. Burned house, no survivors. The local sheriff called it bandits. I never found justice, only retribution. The raw pain in his voice echoed her own. They were both victims of men who valued land over lives. And now you've saved me. Saved Leah, she said softly. I can't repay that. You don't owe me anything, he retorted. Then in a gentler tone, but if you need to expose your father-in-law, you'll need protection. I can't guarantee I'll succeed, but I can try. Rachel looked again at Leah, breathing softly, her future precariously balanced on a single plan. We'll do it, she whispered. We'll ride to the fort, show them the letters. Make sure no one else suffers like Daniel did. Luke nodded, jaw set. But first your daughter has to fully recover. Another day or two of rest, then we plan carefully. We have to outsmart your father-in-law's men, maybe feed them some false leads. A small spark of relief flickered in Rachel's weary soul. She wasn't alone anymore. This reclusive man with haunted eyes had risked everything to step into her battle. For the sake of her daughter, for Daniel's memory, she would trust him. All right, she agreed, voice barely above a whisper. We'll do it together, and for the first time in weeks, the tension in her chest eased. She still had no idea how they did overcome the merciless power of Malcolm Adler. But in Luke's quiet determination, she sensed a possibility, an ember of hope that might yet burn bright enough to guide them through the darkness. The next 2 days blurred in a sequence of quiet chores and hushed conversations. Rachel helped Luke sweep out the barn mend a broken corral rail and gather the last of the season's wild berries from a nearby patch. The cabin remained a stark place, one bed, a single table, a wood-burning stove. But Rachel added small touches of warmth, a dried bouquet of wildflowers in a tin can, fresh-washed linens she found in a trunk left behind by Luke's late wife. Leah spent her afternoons following Luke as he tended the horse they would ride. She peppered him with questions, often carrying her rag doll, and occasionally a small wooden horse Luke had carved from a piece of spare lumber. Gradually, the child's color returned her, laughs sometimes echoing across the yard, as Luke pretended to let her teach him how to brush a horse's tail. The transformation was remarkable from a man so withdrawn, he was nicknamed the Ghost, to someone gently guiding a 6-year-old in the care of animals. Twice riders appeared on the horizon, but each time Luke signaled for Rachel and Leah to hide in the barn's loft. He kept watch with his rifle from behind a rock outcrop, returning only when the strangers veered away. Whether they were ranch hands or simply travelers, Rachel's heart still hammered in fear. Their time here was borrowed. Eventually, Malcolm's men would scour every inch of the territory. At dusk, on the second day, Luke deemed Leah well enough to travel. Around the small dinner table, a sense of solemn purpose united them. At first light, Luke said, we head northwest. The fort's about 4 days' ride. If we avoid main trails and stick to the ravines, we might see watchers posted along the bigger roads. Rachel nodded, absorbing every word as she studied a hand-drawn map Luke had produced. It showed alternative routes through canyons and creek beds, an intricate knowledge gleaned from years in the cavalry and his subsequent solitary life. We'll need supplies, food, water, skins, blankets for Leah. She's strong but still a child. I have enough for a few days, Luke confirmed. We may have to hunt or fish if we're delayed. Leah, half listening, fiddled with her rag doll, Mr. Luke, can we bring your wooden horse too, Lucy? My doll likes it. The corners of Luke's mouth curved in a faint smile. Sure, he'll ride in the saddlebag. We'll have a regular stable of wooden critters by the time we're done. A hush followed the cabin quiet, except for the flicker of the oil lamp. Rachel stared at the faint lines of strain around Luke's eyes. He was risking more than his life. He was risking the painful memories he had tried so hard to bury. Perhaps Leah's presence softened some part of him, or perhaps he couldn't bear another family lost to greed. When they settled to sleep, Leah on the cot, Rachel wrapped in blankets near the stove, and Luke on a makeshift pallet in the far corner. Rachel couldn't help but sense the gravity of what lay ahead. Even with the evidence safely hidden in her skirt proving criminal acts meant confronting men who valued land more than human life. She recalled Daniel's final letter. If you read this, it means I couldn't fight them alone. Find a way for Leah's sake. Her eyes stung. Daniel's death had not only left a void in her heart, it had set in motion a deadly game. In the eerie night quiet, she heard Luke shift on his pallet. She wondered if he too lay awake, haunted by the memory of a destroyed family. Leah's soft breathing anchored them both, a reminder of what they fought for, the promise that an innocent child might grow up free from her father's killer's reach. A rooster crowed before dawn, startling them from uneasy sleep. They gathered their supplies and saddled the horse, Luke double-checking the rifle's condition. Rachel secured her precious letters inside a sewn pouch strapped across her chest. Leah, still drowsy but determined, climbed atop the horse with her rag doll. Luke behind her, and Rachel took second seat on that same horse, arms around Leah. Luke paused in front of the cabin one last time. He looked at the weathered door, the small photograph on the mantel visible through the window, and inhaled deeply. Wait for us, he murmured to the memory of his wife and child. This time I'll do it right. Thus began their ride into the unknown, seeking both justice and survival. The sun rose, flooding the prairie with golden light, and in the hush of that early morning, as the trio ventured northwest, Rachel felt the quiet unity of shared purpose. With each hoofbeat, she carried not only evidence of wrongdoing, but the intangible hope that they might break a cycle of violence, forging a new future for them all. They traveled mostly by night and in the early morning hours, avoiding the sweltering midday sun and prying eyes. The first 2 days passed without incident, though they kept a watchful vigil. Luke guided them through hidden gullies and over ridges that offered vantage points of any potential riders. On these ridges, Rachel sometimes saw dust trails in the distance, search parties or ranchers. Hard to know. Leah adapted surprisingly well, embracing the journey with a child's resilience. At rest stops, she'd gather wildflowers or show Lucy her ragdoll. The wonders of the wide frontier. She and Luke had developed a comfortable rhythm. Leah, forever curious, Luke replying in that low, calm voice, pointing out coyote tracks or eagle nests. For Rachel, watching them lit a spark of gratitude. In those simple interactions, she glimpsed what might have been if Daniel had lived or if Luke's own family had survived. But caution reigned. Every night, Luke insisted on cold camps, no fires and minimal talking. If they had to cook, they used small twig fires shielded by rocks carefully doused afterwards. The territory was no stranger to range wars or rustlers. Luke had a lifetime of scars proving how quickly violence could erupt. On the third day, trouble found them. They were nearing a rocky pass at twilight, the fading sun painting the sky pink and orange, when Luke reined in abruptly. Ahead, a single horse blocked the trail, and its rider brandished a rifle. Even at that distance, Rachel recognized the posture of a professional. She guided Leah behind a boulder. Hard hammering, Luke edged forward with his own rifle half raised. "Looking for me," he called out. The stranger spat. "Looking for a woman and a kid. Word is, there's a bounty. You know anything about that?" His accent suggested he was from out of state, a hired gun, drifting from job to job. Luke didn't answer directly. Rachel crouched behind the boulder, Leah gripping her arm. Lucy pressed tight. She heard the tension in Luke's voice as he said, "Turn around, don't want any trouble," a harsh laugh echoed. "Trouble's all I've got. Don't matter if that woman's your friend or not. Someone's paying good money for her. Step aside, no." The air crackled with potential violence. Leah trembled under Rachel's protective embrace. The next sounds came in a blur, the metallic clack of the stranger's rifle followed by a single shot from Luke's. An echo rolled through the pass. The stranger jerked, rifle dropping, and he fell from his horse with a heavy thud. Rachel's stomach lurched. She pressed Leah's face against her skirt to shield her from the sight. Luke dismounted swiftly, checking the man's pulse. "Dead," he muttered, voice hollow. He rummaged in the man's pockets, retrieving a wanted poster with a rough sketch of a woman and a child. The reward sum was printed in bold lettering. He turned to Rachel, expression grim. "So now we know, word is out with a price on your capture." Despite the fear and revulsion twisting her gut, Rachel forced her gaze to the body. She realized this was the reality of their situation. Lethal force might be the only barrier between them and men who viewed them as coin to collect. She swallowed her horror. "I'm sorry you had to." "No choice," Luke said quietly, leaving the sentence unfinished. No choice but to kill was the unspoken truth. He shoved the poster in his saddlebag, returning to Leah. "You all right, little one?" Leah nodded, though tears threatened Lucy. Scared, she whispered, "She doesn't like loud noises." Luke bent, placing a gentle hand on the ragdoll's head. "Me neither," he admitted. They rode on, pushing further into the pass. Night overtook them, and they found a hidden crevice to camp in, tensions running high. Luke set his rifle within arm's reach. Rachel watched him quietly drag the dead stranger's horse out of sight, removing its saddle to see if anything was useful. He found a stash of bullets, a meager stash of dried beans, and one canteen. Later, as Leah dozed under a thin blanket, Rachel sat with Luke by a tiny shielded fire, each lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered. "Daniel once told me, the West could be cruel. I never imagined it this cruel. Are we truly safe? Nowhere." Luke stirred the embers. "This land can be kind too. It gave me a place to vanish when I needed it. Now it's giving me a reason to come back in, helping you. But we've got to be prepared for worse. That man's death. It won't be the last confrontation if they're serious about collecting that bounty." She studied the lines of his face, illuminated by flickering light, thinking of how fate had tossed them into each other's paths. "You once lost everything in trying to defend your family's land," she said softly. "Yet here you are, risking your life again." His gaze dropped to the smoldering coals. "You do what you must. Sometimes you find something worth the risk." He paused, swallowing thickly. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow we push for that fort." If we're lucky, a handful more miles of rough terrain will keep us out of anyone else's sights. Rachel nodded. The hush of the night pressed in, broken only by Leah's soft breathing. As she drew her blanket tighter around her shoulders, she felt the weight of Daniel's letters pressed to her chest. Letters that might condemn Malcolm and free them all from fear, or they might spark a final stand that left them as casualties. Either way, she realized there was no turning back. By the time they cleared the pass, exhaustion weighed on them like lead. Even Leah's indomitable spirit flagged. On the morning of the fourth day, they found themselves in a narrow valley where a shallow stream trickled enough water to quench thirst and wash away trail dust. Luke guided the horse to drink, then helped Leah slide off to stretch her legs. While Rachel refilled the canteen, Luke climbed a rocky outcrop to scan the horizon. Over the distant hills, he spotted dust plumes. He squinted, trying to discern how many riders, a half dozen more. Their direction implied they might intercept the group if they stuck to the same route. Grim-faced Luke climbed down. "They're closing in," he said. "We might have an hour or two before they get here if they stay on that path. We can't outrun them easily. Not with a single horse carrying 3 knot formed in Rachel's stomach." "Then what do we do?" He eyed the terrain. "We hide or we stand. A hidden gulch up that way might give us an advantage, or we can try backtracking." Leah, half hearing the conversation, hugged Lucy tight. "I can be brave," she announced in a trembling voice. Luke's lips quirked. "I know you can, but let's see if we can avoid more shooting." They led the horse into a narrow side gulch where rocky walls formed a natural choke point. Rachel realized the strategic brilliance any riders who found them here would be forced to approach single file. Luke had them gather loose stones for an impromptu barrier behind which Leah and Rachel could crouch. As they worked, Rachel felt a strange calm settle over her. This was so different from her old life, baking bread, singing lullabies to Leah. Now she was stacking rocks like a soldier preparing for battle. She wondered if Daniel watched from beyond, seeing how far circumstances had driven them. The hour passed in tense silence. Leah huddled behind the barrier, Lucy and the wooden horse in her arms. Luke stationed himself at the front, rifle on his lap, Rachel armed with a small revolver. Luke had pressed into her hand, crouched near him, heart thudding. Then faintly they heard hoofbeats echo off canyon walls, shouts. The echo made it impossible to gauge how far. Luke pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for complete silence. Leah squeezed her eyes shut, as if that might block out the fear. A figure on horseback appeared around a bend in the gulch reins. Slack. Rachel recognized the leading man's stooped posture. It was Neil Adler, Daniel's younger brother. He rode carefully, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. Another pair followed. The group fanned out as though expecting an ambush. Neil raised a hand, halting them. "Rachel," he called, voice cracking. "I know you're out here. We're not here to kill you. Let's talk. I have new information." Luke tensed. "Could be a trick," he whispered to Rachel. She bit her lip, recalling Daniel's note that Neil wasn't wholly lost, but she also knew these toughs flanking him were presumably hired guns. "If we keep silent, they might search the gulch," she said. "We can't outrun them in here," Neil tried again. "Rachel, please. Father has gone too far. I can't let him do this." Luke exchanged a look with Rachel. Leah stared up at her mother, eyes wide. "All right," Rachel breathed. "If Neil has turned, it might be our best shot, but we stay behind." "Cover," Luke nodded, calling out, "Stop there! Throw down your weapons!" The men muttered, and one spat Neil, desperation shining in his eyes, motioned for them to comply. Grudgingly, the hired guns dropped a carbine and a revolver, stepping back. "Now step away from them," Luke ordered. They obeyed with ill grace. Rachel rose from behind the stones, revolver in hand, though her arms shook. "Neil, what do you want?" He slid from his horse, palms up. "I want to fix what Father's done. He murdered Daniel, Rachel. I have proof. Financial records, letters instructing the mill sabotage." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat. "I can't hide from it any longer. That's why I defied him and came here. We can bring this to the territorial judge." Tears pricked Rachel's eyes, even as caution warred with relief. She saw truth in Neil's haggard expression, guilt and heartbreak. "Why now?" she demanded, voice trembling. "Because I watched him bribe the sheriff, sabotage the stage." "It's monstrous," Neil said. "Your life and Leah's matter more than his greed. I couldn't live with it." Luke stepped forward, collecting the papers from Neil's outstretched hand, rifling through them. His gaze hardened. These match what Rachel's carrying. Combined, They'd nail Malcolm for theft fraud and Daniel's murder. One of the hired guns scowled. You just deliver those? Or kill them all? It's your father, man. Neil whirled, voice cracking. No more killing. If you want blood money, you're out of luck. Luke's hold on the rifle remained unwavering. The air bristled with tension. For a moment, it seemed one of the guns might lunge for his weapon, but a warning glance from Luke, plus the knowledge of being outnumbered in a narrow gulch, dissuaded them. Rachel exhaled shakily. Neil, if you're honest, thank you. But your father, he won't let you live with this betrayal, Mom. Realize that Neil's face darkened with sorrow. I do. But if it means absolving Daniel's memory and saving you and Leah, so be it. Luke nodded toward the canyon's exit. We head to the fort. You men can ride with us under watch or you can vanish. But if you try anything, you die. The mercenaries weighed their options. Looking at Luke's cold stare, they muttered curses and decided to throw in with Neil. Perhaps hoping for some lesser compromise, Luke signaled for Rachel and Leah to gather their gear. As they began the slow trek out of the gulch, Rachel's mind reeled. She had wanted evidence, and now she had it in spades enough to topple Malcolm's empire. But the path ahead still bristled with peril. The hired guns rode tensely subdued for the moment, yet any misstep could spark a firefight. Beside her, Leah held Lucy, confusion etched on her young face. In a soft voice, she asked, Is Uncle Neil good now? Rachel stroked her daughter's hair, eyes on Neil's slumped shoulders. I think he wants to be, she replied. Sometimes doing what's right comes late, but it's better than never. Luke caught her eye, the slightest nod passing between them. They had come a long way from that scorching day when he found Rachel and Leah in the desert. The threat was far from over, but with Neil's defection, they inched closer to justice. They reached Fort Blackstone by mid-afternoon the following day, after riding through storms that turned the plains to muddy quagmires. A small cluster of wooden buildings, the fort served as both a military outpost and territorial administrative center. Its watchtower loomed, a flag snapping in the wind, promising official law in a land so often ruled by brute force. Luke led the convoy rifle at the ready. Neil and the two hired men followed, uncomfortable in the presence of so many uniformed officers patrolling the gates. Rachel rode with Leah behind them, cradling the precious documents that would, she hoped, end Malcolm's reign of terror. A no-nonsense older officer, Marshal Devlin, stepped forward, meeting them at the main gate. He took one look at Luke, whom he apparently recognized given his raised eyebrow, and then studied the motley group of men, including Neil. What's going on here? Luke dismounted slowly. Marshal, these folks have evidence of serious crimes, murder, forgery, land fraud. We need an official hearing, maybe a judge, a chance to make statements. Also, we have an arrest to request Malcolm Adler. Devlin's eyes narrowed. Malcolm Adler, the ranch baron? Neil stepped forward. He's my father, and he's a murderer, sir. He had my brother killed, and he tried to murder my sister-in-law and niece. He offered the sheaf of papers. Here's partial proof. Rachel has more. The hush was profound. Several soldiers approached warily, as if uncertain whether this was some trick. Rachel slid off her horse, helping Leah down. She locked eyes with the marshal, holding out the letter Daniel had written, and the hidden records. We almost died to bring these to you, she said softly, voice tight with suppressed emotion. Please help us. Leah, sensing the gravity, clutched Lucy. Luke stood behind them, face set as if expecting a fight, but Devlin slowly nodded. All right, let's take this inside. You'll have to make formal statements. They were ushered into a small administrative building with a single desk, a handful of chairs and shelves stacked with ledgers. Lanterns cast flickering light across the walls. Devlin rifled through the documents, occasionally pausing to whistle under his breath. Suspicions about Adler have circulated for years, but no one pinned him, Devlin mused aloud. With these letters, plus an eyewitness confession from Neil Adler, we might finally have enough for an arrest warrant. Neil sat, head in his hands, as if only now comprehending the finality of his choice. The two hired men lurked in a corner, eyeing the uniformed soldiers warily, uncertain whether they'd be detained. Rachel offered a trembling smile to Leah, who perched on a crate near the door. It's almost over, she whispered to her daughter, though she wasn't entirely sure. Luke stepped forward. Marshal Malcolm has men out combing the plains. They might be heading here to intercept or to eliminate witnesses. We can't risk waiting. Devlin nodded curtly. Agreed. I'll dispatch a squad to bring him in. Another group can secure your ranch. Ms. Adler, if you want it protected from sabotage, but we'll also need your statement under oath. Rachel exhaled, relief and anxiety swirling. Yes, of course. Anything to ensure he faces justice. The official inquiries began. Devlin jotted notes, asked clarifying questions about the sabotage at the lumber mill, the stagecoach driver's betrayal, and how Daniel had discovered hidden silver veins on the ranch. Neil recounted every detail he knew, voice subdued with guilt. Rachel shared the background of Daniel's suspicious accident, tears surfacing when she described his final days. The letter Daniel wrote sealed the narrative, describing a conspiracy that reached back months. Outside the building's window, soldiers hurried about readying horses and weapons. Leah stared at them through the glass eyes wide. Once more, Luke placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He still wore the stoic mask that had earned him the ghost moniker, but Rachel sensed a tenderness in his posture. As darkness fell, Devlin looked up from the final line of notes. I'll telegraph the district judge. Meanwhile, you're under official protection. We have some bunks in the barracks for you to rest. Tomorrow we'll gather statements from the two men who accompanied you. He flicked a sharp glance at the hired guns. If they comply, maybe they'll face lesser charges. One of them cleared his throat, nodding. The other shrugged, clearly reluctant, but resigned to the situation. Leah tugged Rachel's sleeve. Mama, she whispered, is Mr. Luke going to stay with us? Before Rachel could reply, Luke gave a half smile. I'll be around, Leah. And in that soft exchange, Rachel realized something had shifted. Luke. Carver was no longer the solitary ghost wandering the plains. He had found a cause, and maybe in them a reason to join the living world again. A guard escorted them to a small bunk room with cots. Leah immediately nestled in ragdoll tucked under her chin, drifting off almost instantly from sheer exhaustion. Luke lingered by the door, posture uncertain. You can stay, Rachel said. I'd feel safer. He hesitated, but seeing her expression, nodded, taking a seat on a rough wooden bench. Rifle propped beside him, he kept watch. Rachel settled on the adjacent cot. It's nearly done, she told herself, fighting a swirl of emotions. In her mind, she pictured Daniel's warm smile, hoping he could see how his final pleas had led to this moment of potential redemption. Word travels fast in frontier towns, and by dawn, fresh tension crackled around the fort. A messenger galloped in with news. Malcolm Adler, accompanied by a posse of well-armed men, was en route, presumably to rescue his daughter-in-law and granddaughter from alleged kidnappers. Marshal Devlin wasted no time assembling a detachment of soldiers to confront them. Rachel woke to the clamor of boots on wooden planks. Leah stirred, rubbing sleepy eyes. Luke rose from the bench where he'd dozed, and Neil, who had barely slept, stared out the bunk room window at the swirl of uniformed bodies. Father's desperate, Neil muttered. He'll try to spin it as if you abducted them. Luke's jaw clenched. He can spin all he wants, but the evidence is in Devlin's hands. Rachel steadied Leah with a comforting hand. Let's find the marshal. We have to be present when Malcolm arrives or he'll twist everything. They stepped into the dusty courtyard where Devlin stood, conferring with a squad of soldiers. We'll meet Adler on the open flats a mile south, the marshal said briskly. I won't have a firefight right at the fort gates. He eyed Rachel. You and your daughter should stay behind the walls. Rachel drew a shaky breath. I'd rather face him. He's my father-in-law. If he tries to claim we left on our own will, or that Luke forced us, I need to speak up. Devlin weighed her words. All right, but you'll ride behind our lines and keep the girl well out of harm's way. Within the hour, a strange procession set off from the fort uniformed cavalry at the front. Rachel and Leah in a wagon behind them, Luke and Neil riding alongside. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Leah sensed it, hugging Lucy to her chest, eyes darting to the rifles and sabers all around. They arrived at a broad stretch of hard-packed ground, the morning sun glinting off distant ridges. Soon enough, dust billowed on the horizon, announcing Malcolm Adler's approach. Rachel's pulse thundered as she saw over a dozen riders behind him, most brandishing firearms. Marshal Devlin formed a line of cavalry, hoisting a white flag of parley. Malcolm's group slowed, uncertain. Then Malcolm, sporting a fine suit and a smug expression, cantered forward. On spotting Rachel in the wagon, he affected an air of relief. Rachel, child, thank God we found you. We feared you'd been abducted by this outlaw. He cast an accusatory glare at Luke. Before Rachel could speak, Devlin raised a hand. That's enough, Adler. We know about your forging deeds, about the sabotage that killed your own son. We have statements from Neil and official documents. You're under arrest. An ugly scowl twisted Malcolm's features. He shot Neil a look of pure venom. You ungrateful whelp, siding with outsiders. We're family. Neil swallowed, but he remained firm. You murdered Daniel's father. You left Leah and Rachel to die. That's not family. Several of Malcolm's hired guns shifted nervously. They'd expected to retrieve Rachel quietly, not face a line of cavalry. Malcolm barked at them, "Stand your ground. The law here is in my pocket." But Devlin advanced, two men brandishing official warrants. "Not anymore, Adler. The territorial judge is en route, and we have ample cause to hold you. I advise you to surrender." A charged silence fell. Rachel climbed down from the wagon. Leah in tow, stepping next to Devlin despite Luke's protective scowl. She glared at Malcolm. "You tried to kill us, Malcolm. You threw away any claim you had to Leah's well-being the moment you planned that stagecoach sabotage. So don't pretend you care." Malcolm's arrogance wavered for an instant. Then he snarled, "If I go down, half the big ranchers in this region tumble with me. Mark my words, you'll regret crossing me." "Regret this," Devlin said, motioning for soldiers to flank him. "Hand over your weapons and come quietly." Two of Malcolm's men started to draw, but Luke's rifle was already leveled. Eyes cold. "Don't," he warned, a voice a lethal monotone. The men froze, undone by the cavalry's superior numbers. Malcolm's glare flicked from Rachel to Luke. "You'll pay, both of you," he spat. But he raised his hands in forced surrender. The hired guns, seeing no advantage, followed suit. A murmur spread among the cavalry as they disarmed Malcolm's posse. Leah stood behind Rachel, trembling with fear and anger. Rachel knelt and wrapped her daughter in a protective embrace, murmuring, "It's done, sweetheart. He can't hurt us now." From the corner of her vision, Rachel spotted Neil, pale and shaking. He locked eyes with her, guilt etched in every line of his face. She gave him a curt nod, an acknowledgement that his last-minute confession had helped. Perhaps it was the best redemption he could manage. Marshal Devlin began issuing orders. Malcolm was stripped of his fine jacket, hands bound behind him. His protests fell on deaf ears, overshadowed by the stark relief washing over Rachel. She felt Luke's presence behind her, a silent pillar of strength. A hush settled as Devlin read out the charges. Conspiracy, murder, fraud. Malcolm's furious ranting faded into the background. Rachel squeezed Leah's hand, inhaling the dusty air. As if for the first time, Daniel would be avenged, the ranch safe from further sabotage. Leah's future once again belonged to them, not to a patriarch who prized land over life. Luke lowered his rifle, stepping next to them. His eyes flickered with caution, as though still expecting a final outburst of violence. But all Malcolm could manage was a bitter glare, dwarfed by the circle of armed cavalry. The man's downfall was complete. In that moment, Rachel felt a strange calm wash over her. They had survived betrayal, desertion, and bounty hunters. Now she stood with Leah and Luke at her side, the future uncertain but free from the yoke of Malcolm's tyranny. If some ghost still lingered in the form of old grief, at least justice had been served. And beyond the horizon, she sensed the promise of new beginnings. 2 weeks later, the sun rose over the newly restored homestead, painting the fields in gentle gold. A soft breeze fluttered the curtains Rachel had sewn, letting in the sound of Leah's laughter as she fed chickens outside. Gone were the menacing shadows that once darkened this land. Neil had testified, fully sealing Malcolm's conviction. The judge ordered the ranch deeds returned to Rachel, validating Daniel's original purchase. In a quiet ceremony overseen by Marshal Devlin, Rachel expressed gratitude for Luke's pivotal role. And though Luke tried to slip away, unaccustomed to praise or crowds, the combined pleas of Leah and Rachel convinced him to stay. Over the following days, rumors spread about the ghost of Calder Valley rejoining civilization, forging a new life with the widow he had rescued. Now Rachel stood in the yard wearing a light cotton dress, her hair pinned back as she inspected the newly constructed shed. "You build faster than any carpenter," she teased Luke, who set aside his hammer, sweat beading on his brow. He shrugged with that old hint of bashfulness. "Army taught me a few things, and living alone taught me the rest." Nearby, Leah trotted up, holding Lucy by one arm and a small wooden horse by the other. "Mama, Mr. Luke said I can ride a pony soon if I keep feeding and brushing it, right?" Rachel's chest tightened with contentment. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." She tousled Leah's hair, thinking of Daniel. He'd wanted Leah to ride to embrace the ranching life. Now she could free from fear. Luke set the hammer aside and approached, swirling dust at his boots. "I've been thinking," he began, tentative, "the herd. I've been taming might flourish with a little more farmland, some orchard trees. Maybe we expanded." Rachel's smile lit her face. She saw in Luke's expression that he was finally allowing himself to imagine a future. "An orchard. We can plant apple trees for Leah so she can climb them one day." A thoughtful hush passed on the porch rail. The battered photograph from Luke's cabin rested, the one of his lost wife and child. He'd placed it near Rachel's own image of Daniel, two sets of memories, side by side. The ghosts were no longer haunting but guiding them. A wagon rumbled up the lane. Marshal Devlin hopped down, tipping his hat in greeting. "You're a sight," he exclaimed, scanning the improvements. "I see you've wasted no time making this a proper family ranch." Rachel offered him water. "Thanks to you, Marshal," and to Luke, Devlin sipped from the cup. Nodding, "Heard news that a few unscrupulous ranchers have fled the territory, not wanting the law to pry into their dealings. Seems Malcolm's downfall made them nervous." Luke's gaze hardened with quiet satisfaction. "Less trouble for us, then." Leah tugged on Devlin's sleeve. "Look, we have baby chicks." She pointed to a small brood. Devlin chuckled, ruffling her hairs. In that simple sunlit scene, Rachel felt the final pieces of her old fear slip away. The ranch Daniel had poured his heart into was in good hands now. She, Leah, and Luke, three once wounded souls, had found healing in forging something new from the tragedies that had nearly consumed them. After Devlin left, promising to visit again soon, the trio stood by the corral watching a chestnut colt prance about. Luke set a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You know, I never believed in second chances, but I guess I found one." She covered his rough hand with hers. "We both did, Leah, too." The child squealed in delight as the colt trotted near her, flicking its tail. Sometimes life just needs the right soil to grow again. They lingered there, letting the day's warmth sink in. Over by the porch, Leah's wooden horse collection and Lucy rested on a bale of straw, guardians of a new era for this land. The ghosts of old violence had been exorcised, replaced by the steady rhythm of everyday ranch life. And though the memories of Daniel, of Luke's lost family, would always be part of them, they carried those memories with reverence rather than pain. Come evening, as they settled for supper inside a cabin now filled with laughter, Rachel placed a final finishing touch on the mantel, a framed photograph capturing her Leah and Luke on the front steps. The ranch behind them. It wasn't a grand portrait, just a small tintype shot by a traveling photographer, but it embodied everything she wanted to remember. Battered hearts uniting, forging a home out of a harsh land and defending it against all odds. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, gilding the fields and hills in amber. Luke, finishing the last of his chores, paused to breathe in the summer air. He glanced back at the cabin where warm lamplight glowed through the windows, a beacon calling him in from the darkness. Inside, the only family he had left waited for him, proof that sometimes broken roads could converge into a shared destiny. And as he stepped into the welcoming glow, he couldn't help but think, maybe we deserve this peace after all. From my perspective, witnessing Rachel and Leah transform a dire betrayal into a path toward hope is downright uplifting. The ghost, Luke Carver, learned that healing isn't about burying your past, but sharing it. Their unbreakable bond proves you can find family where you least expect it, rebuilding shattered lives into something stronger than ever. What struck me most is how these three souls, once so alone, embrace one another's strengths to defeat injustice, reminding us that courage and compassion can flourish in even the harshest environments. The simplest acts of kindness, like Luke offering that first sip of water, led to a new life for them all. If their journey resonated with you, drop a comment below so we can discuss your favorite parts. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support fuels more heartfelt stories that celebrate resilience and triumph in the Wild West and beyond.